Good morning. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to House Judiciary. Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Chair Breen.
Present.
Representatives Edwards.
Here.
Carter. Hope.
Here.
Arbit. Devendorf.
Here.
Hoskins.
Here.
Cerniglu.
Here.
Fink.
Here.
Wenzel.
Here.
Wozniak.
Here.
Outman.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 11 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will take a motion from Representative Edwards to approve and adopt the minutes from the previous meeting, which would have been November 1st. And those minutes are now adopted. And I just want to remind everybody here today, going forward, every meeting, if you are here and you wish to testify or you wish to submit written testimony or you wish to otherwise be heard by the committee, please make sure you fill out one of these white cards. They are up here on the table. We need your first and your last name and the organization that you represent, or if you are representing yourself, and whether or not you support or oppose the legislation. We also ask every committee meeting that if you are here, please keep your testimony limited to the subjects that are on the agenda. And just so you guys all know, today we're going to be taking testimony only on House Bills 4924 and 5204. We are going to be re-referring some bills, specifically House Bill 5271 to the Committee on Criminal Justice, House Bills 4793 and 5316 through 5319 to the Committee on Government Operations, and House Bill 4225 to the Committee on Education. And with that, we're going to kick it off with House Bill 5204, and the committee is going to go very briefly at ease.
The committee will come back to order. We will take testimony from Chair Breen regarding House Bill 5204.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I also have with me up here Trevor Van Dyke from SCAO. And what we have here is a super easy peasy bill. This has to do with swearing in of new attorneys. When you are admitted to the bar, you have to go through, before you can be admitted to the bar, you have to go to law school, you have to pass the bar, and then you have to be sworn in. You can be sworn in right now by a circuit court judge or by a member of the Supreme Court. You cannot be sworn in by a member of the Court of Appeals. That is because when these rules were originally written, there was no Court of Appeals. So this is just simply to allow Court of Appeals judges to swear in new attorneys. And I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Van Dyke to give additional information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, to echo those comments, the omission of the Court of Appeals judges from this authority was not on purpose. The statute was enacted in 1961 and became effective in 1963. This is prior to the existence of the Court of Appeals. The 1963 Michigan Constitution was amended and established the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals heard their first case in January of 1965. So we think that this is just a little oversight to include them, as the Circuit Court and the Supreme Court has this authority already. Currently, the Court of Appeal judges must request a special assignment from the Michigan Supreme Court to act as a circuit court judge to administer the oaths and swear in new lawyers. It's a very inefficient process whereby it calls the individual to formally request made by each judge. The request includes jurisdiction and reasons for assignment. The approval process requires issuance of a special assignment number, list of duties and limitations, commencement and expiration dates, and all required final approval by the State Court Administrative Office. The Court of Appeals judges have been doing these for many years pursuant to special assignments without any incidences. House Bill 5204 would eliminate the need for the Court of Appeal judges to seek special assignment requests and eliminate staff time and resources to approve such request. So thank you for your time and support for this legislation.
Any questions?
We do have a question from Fink.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the Court of Appeals judges currently make a request to the Supreme Court. I've witnessed one of these swearing in ceremonies before. My recollection was that the Court of Appeals judge actually went to the circuit court to get a special assignment. Is that the same process you're talking about, or are there two different ways to do this, or what's the?
No, it's on special assignment. It comes from the Supreme Court, so it comes from SCAO, and then they get assigned to be a circuit court.
They're sitting by
judge.
designation as a circuit court judge, but that assignment is still coming through the state court administrative
Correct.
office. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Two questions, if I may.
Wiseneck, would you like to ask your questions now?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Is there any geographic restrictions, and where does the $25 go?
I'm not too sure about the $25. I don't know about the geographical. I think that's in the special assignment is set the parameters within that.
Usually, yeah.
So it's upon individual request, I would assume. So. Yeah, I can look into. I don't have that information. I'll certainly look into that for you.
There's also somebody sitting here in the courtroom that might be able to answer that question, who's with the State Bar. He might have that information, but I don't know where that $25 goes.
Do we have any more questions? All right, the committee will go at ease.
We are back. We are now going to, oh wait, I'm sorry, we have to read in some cards. We have supporting the bill, and already has spoken, Trevor Van Dyke from SCAO, and Nathan Triplett from the State Bar supporting the bill, and Monica Martinez on behalf of the Michigan Judges Association also supporting the bill. We are now going to move on to House Bill 4924 on partition of heirs. And Representative Devendorf, I believe you have an introduction for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee members, land, property. What is the meaning of this to a family? Black, brown, indigenous, white, low income, middle income, or affluent. Land is equity. And with every generation, it is one of the single strongest determinants of generational wealth, stability, and opportunity for each and every one of us. The small family farm, regardless of who owns it, is in decline. One fact our farmers have learned the hard way throughout this country's history is that once a farm is gone, it doesn't come back. Yet a farm, like so many assets, can be passed down through generations and saved, continuously building upon itself to benefit our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. House Bill 4924, the Partition of Heirs Property Act before us today, closes a gap in Michigan law that disproportionately harms the ability of low-income and middle-income farmers and farmers from underrepresented communities to maintain and grow equity as a result, economic stability. In 1910, black farmers made up 14% of all farmers in the United States. In 1920, almost 1 million black farmers held 41.4 million acres of land, comprising a seventh of farm owners. Today, black farmers own about 1% of all farms, representing a 90% loss over time. It cannot be overstated the difference it would have made had these farmers been able to hold on to this land until today. And this is just one example for one community. Farm ownership, particularly for those least wealthy among us, has dipped so dramatically since the early 1900s, in part due to a gap in law that exists in absence of a legal will. Currently, when a middle to low income property owner who owns real property passes away without a will in place, the property is passed to the heirs as tenants in common. In this scenario, any one heir or tenant can force a partition and forced sale of the property. Our wealthier farmers are more likely to have estate planning in place and legal counsel on hand. The Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act creates due process that allows for all tenants to weigh in on the future of a property and a potential sale. From New York to Florida, to Texas to California, this policy has already been enacted in 23 states across the country and receives broad bipartisan support from legislators and diverse coalitions that include civil rights organizations, real estate professionals, legal scholars, bar associations, and agricultural advocacy groups. For some, this is an equity bill, and for others, it is legislation that clears up legal headaches. For everyone, it is long overdue and just common sense. I will be allowing our experts to present in detailed legalese and to take most of the questions. I'm happy to return for questions after all of the testimony if necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Understanding that you wish to defer any questions until after the others have testified, we will call up to, we have Professor Thomas Mitchell on Zoom, and Jane Sternecki, also on Zoom. I was unclear if you guys are going to be testifying together or...
Sequentially.
Okay, well, you're there first. Let's go.
Good morning, Chairs Breen, Vice Chair Edwards, and Fink, and fellow members of the House Judiciary Committee. My name is Professor Thomas Mitchell, and I'm a law professor now at the Boston College Law School. I'm here to testify in support of HB 4924, the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. As a representative for the Uniform Law Commission, I served as the reporter or the person with the principal drafting authority for the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act when I was serving on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin Law School. As you have, as been stated, the UPHPA has very broad-based support. Nationally, organizations such as the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the National Association of Realtors, the NAACP, the American Farmland Trust, the American Land Title Association, and two sections of the American Bar Association have strongly supported and endorsed the act. In several states, including Illinois, Mississippi, and Missouri, we've received strong endorsement and support from the relevant state farm bureaus. As has been indicated, heirs property is a very prevalent form of common real property ownership and is a subset of tenancy in common ownership. The owners of heirs property represent a very diverse group of families in terms of their racial and ethnic backgrounds. And it is a phenomenon that both is found in rural areas and in municipalities. These heirs property owners include farmers and ranchers, owners of single-family homes in cities, suburbs, and rural areas, and certain indigenous people as well. This widespread phenomenon is attributable to the fact that at least 50% of Americans die without a will or an estate plan. Although it does impact many different families of different races and ethnicities, it disproportionately impacts Black and Brown families because in this country, we have a massive racial and ethnic will-making or estate planning gap with, for example, Black and Latino families typically only making wills at the rate of 20%. So let me just provide an overview of the UPHPA. It's an act that addresses abusive so-called partition actions, which have resulted in substantial property loss among heirs property owners. These forced sales has stripped away a substantial amount of generational wealth from these disadvantaged families who tend to be socially and economically disadvantaged. The UPHPA enhances due process and private property rights of vulnerable families who own tenancy in common property, often referred to as heirs property, by increasing their ability to maintain ownership of their property in a partition action, and by protecting their real estate wealth that tends to be a disproportionate amount of their wealth because low income, low wealth families, their wealth is concentrated in their property ownership. The UPHPA has three primary protections. First, it includes a buyout procedure where those members of the ownership group who want to maintain ownership of the property can buy out the fractional interest of the co-tenant who seeks the forced sale of the property. Second, the act recalibrates the test used to decide whether to divide a property or to order it sold. And we're talking about typically farm properties or other large properties. And it does so by rejecting what I call the economics only test and including a test that balances economic interests with non-economic interests, including considering the impact a forced sale would have on somebody's legal use of the property, including using it for basic housing. Third, the UPHPA does recognize that in some partition actions, the most just remedy is the forced sale of the property. If you're dealing with a single family home in Detroit, for example, you can't divide that. But it replaces the current forced sale procedure that typically results in a sale well below market value with what we call the open market sales procedure that mimics a sale between a willing seller and a willing buyer, with the appointment of a real estate broker who must list the property for its fair market value appraisal, no artificial time limits on when the property needs to be sold, the ability to have open houses and other showings of the property, and the ability of bidders to make bids contingent on their ability to get financing. Another key feature that has contributed to the significant number of enactments around the country is that in 2018, Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill that specifically references the UPHPA and provides incentives to states to enact it. And the incentives basically indicate that farmers and ranchers who own heirs property in states that have passed the UPHPA are entitled to a somewhat broader access to USDA programs than farmers and ranchers who own heirs properties in states that have not enacted the UPHPA. And it also makes it easier for those families to access low interest USDA loans to help heirs property owners clear title to their property and to get a will or an estate plan. As is indicated, the UPHPA has gained broad support around the country. It has indicated 21 states, the District of Columbia and the U.S. Virgin Islands have now enacted it into law. Another example of its broad-based support is that of these 23 enactments, 12 are in red states and 11 are in blue states or jurisdictions. It is the law in states with a majority of the U.S. population, given that 6 of the 8 largest states have now enacted the UPHPA into law. Another feature of its growing support is there are now 4 jurisdictions, California, Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, that have made the UPHPA the general partition law that applies to all tenancy in common property, not just to heirs property. California, for example, first enacted the standard UPHPA, and after a very positive experience with it, decided to make it the general partition law. And at this time, legislatures in Arizona, Kentucky, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and North Carolina are considering UPHPA bills in addition to the Michigan legislature. We don't just have a number of enactments as an example of success, but the UPHPA is working well in those states and other jurisdictions that have enacted it into law. We've heard from practitioners in states where the UPHPA is law that the number of abusive partition actions has significantly decreased. This has given heirs property owners breathing room to stabilize their ownership, to make wills and estate plans. And in those instances where there has been a forced sale of the property, the open market sales procedure is generating significantly higher sales prices to the extent of at least a third to a half more than in with respect to the current sales procedure. I'll just give you one example. Two real estate attorneys in Fort Worth, Texas reported to me that property was sold using the open market procedure of the UPHPA, and the property sold for $2.5 million. And that after the partition action, the lawyers for each of the parties, the plaintiffs and the defendants, got together, and they all agreed that if the property had been sold under the background law at this public auction at a courthouse, the property would not have yielded more than $1 million. In closing, I urge your committee to report HB 4924 with a favorable recommendation. And let me just also thank Representative Devendorf for introducing our bill. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions later on.
Thank you. I'm wondering, can you give us a real life example? Oh, did we lose you? One moment while our IT people try to get him back. I suppose I could also ask of the next witness if we can't. Oh, well, that would be a problem. The committee will go at ease while we attempt to fix this technical issue.
And get back on.
No, it looks like they're reconnecting. Can you hear me in the committee room?
Yes, I
Alright.
actually did have a question for Professor Mitchell if we can get him back. There we go. Hi. Can you hear us? Oh, let me call us back to order. We are back. Professor Mitchell, can you hear me?
Is the committee there?
We are here. Can you hear me? Professor Mitchell, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what happened there, but I do have a question. I'm wondering if you could give us a real life example of what happens now without this act in place. Just as an example, maybe if one or perhaps half of the heirs wish to divest of some property and be rid of it, and a majority of the heirs wish to keep it. Can you walk us through what happens now without this act in place?
Yeah, sure. So under the background partition law, any one of the common owners who own a fractional undivided interest, right? They don't own any particular part of the property. It's like owning a share in a corporation, has the unilateral right to file a partition action and to request the court to order the forced sale of the property, what we call the partition by sale. That co-tenant who does that doesn't have to own the property for any particular length of the time. It could be a real estate speculator who bought out a family member who now lives in Oakland, California, for example, who had a 2% interest. And in that partition action, the court doesn't have to consider the fact that the overwhelming majority of the co-tenants, the common owners, want to maintain ownership of the property. The court doesn't have to consider that there has been longstanding ownership, maybe over the course of several generations, within the family. The court doesn't have to consider that if ordering a forced sale will significantly reduce somebody's quality of housing, perhaps even render them homeless, and simply kind of looks at economically, are there what we call economies of scale? Will the property, if it's sold, likely return a price that is worth more than the parcels that would result from physically dividing the property? And so ostensibly, although most state statutes give a very weak preference to the partition in kind, in reality, by only taking into account this economic test, the forced sale has become the norm, as opposed to the physical division. There's another thing. So we're just talking about formal court processes, but a phenomenon that's been playing out across the country is that real estate speculators who are very familiar with the background partition law have been preying upon vulnerable heirs property owners. So essentially they buy out, some third cousin's fractional interest. They then meet with the family and they give them a quick tutorial in partition law. And they basically explain to them that they have them over the barrel, and that they can go the route of filing a partition action, requiring the family to try to expend resources fighting them with, oftentimes they don't have the money to hire an attorney. But even if they did, they're like, the result is predetermined. There's going to be a sale. The sale is going to be well below market value, maybe a fire sale. So the message that they convey to these families is, you might as well sell to us now. And that outside of before you even have a formal partition action filed in court, there's been huge numbers of families that have lost they have lost their property in what I call the shadow of the law. In other words, the real estate speculators have the upper hand, and they just are able to convince the family members that they stand no chance. So that's what's happening. Like I said, it's happening in cities. It's happening in rural America. So the example I gave you from Texas was a rural example. In 2019, this wonderful investigative reporter for New York City's largest TV station, NY1, exposed the fact that there was a ring of speculators that were preying on Black families throughout New York City. And that's actually the investigative report that was the catalyst for our enactment of the UPHPA in New York in 2020.
So how often is it happening that the court is ordering let's say somebody winds up buying out a quarter of a parcel of land? Does the court then have discretion as to which quarter? I'm thinking, just as an example, if part of a piece of land is contaminated or they're sitting on a copper mine, something of that nature. Do we see that happening at any point?
Yeah, so once again, the tenancy in common ownership, the subset that's family owned, the heir's property, it's what we call undivided ownership. So if you have a 25% interest, you don't own any particular part of the property. It's like owning shares in a corporation. So what has become the norm is just the for sale. And then you, as the 25% owner, are entitled, after the expenses are paid for how much it costs to sell the property, for the notice, you're entitled to 25% of whatever is left in terms of the net sale proceeds. So that's if it goes the partition sale route, which has become increasingly the norm. Even in instances where the court could have ordered, as a practical matter, the physical division of the property. So if we're talking about the smaller subset of cases where the courts order the physical division, we call that a partition in kind or partition by division. The court has discretion about how it will divide the land and who gets what, right? So at the end, there will be separately titled parcels that will be allocated to individual tenants, co-tenants, that they then go their own way. They're no longer part of a common ownership arrangement. And so the court has wide discretion in terms of how it will divide the property, and once it does, how it will allocate the parcels that result from the division to individual co-tenants, or sometimes there could be a subgroup that decides it wants to be considered together to then get one of the parcels that results from the subdivision.
Thank you. Representative Fink, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Professor Mitchell, for being here. I get this is the fundamental. I guess the fundamental question I have is, if we apply the maxim from economics that there are no solutions, only trade-offs, what are we losing by shifting from the current system to this one? I mean, if you think it's nothing, I understand, but I have some suspicion of what I think it might be, but I'd be interested in your answer to that question. What are at least the potential downsides here?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So let me just say two things about that. The trade-off that was mentioned by many courts and repeated by some law professors and other legal commentators was this notion that selling the entire property could result in economies of scale, meaning that the value of the entire property exceeded the aggregate value of the parcels that would result from a physical division. All right, so that was the big selling point. Part of that argument was that, we can easily quantify like values, economic values, but what we can't quantify is when a family says the property's been in my family since 1910. We can't quantify, somebody's attachment because the property had particular cultural meaning or historical meaning, right? And so it's just easier to bracket those non-economic things and ignore them. Okay. So the one thing I'll say about that first is the benefit of those sales, as articulated by these economies of scale, which was going to yield wealth maximization, was mythical. It was not true. And, I wrote a law review article about that about 10 years ago. And why I say that is why it was mythical is that when the courts were doing that analysis, they would first consider the fair market value of the entire parcel. And then they'd come up with an estimate of what was the value of the subdivided parts. And then they would aggregate them. So let's simple example, 100 acres of farm property. They'd have a fair market. The idea was, well, what's the fair market value of that? And let's compare it. Let's just say there's two co-tenants. If the court divided that into two 50-acre parcels, well, what's the value of each 50 acre, right? So let's say the value of the 100 acres, just for sake of argument, is $500,000. But the value of the two 50-acre parcels was only $200,000 each, right? So aggregated $400,000. And the court said, see, economies of scale, we're maximizing wealth. The fundamental problem with that analysis was this assumption that when the property was sold, it would be sold under conditions that are designed to produce a fair market value price. In fact, in every state, including Michigan, the sales procedure is a forced sale procedure that is specifically designed to produce a forced sale price, which is a price in the real estate economics literature that is well known to be substantially below a market value price. So for example, why does that happen in a partition sale? You have very scant notice to the public, often in the legal section of a newspaper of general circulation that's often just an online newspaper, not well read by the public. You have no right as a prospective bidder at these auctions to inspect the property, so you got to assume it's a lemon. The sale is ordered oftentimes within 3 weeks of the court ordering the partition sale, so limited exposure to the market. And then these bidders at the courthouse have to make an all-cash bid. They can't make a bid contingent on their getting financing. None of those features I just ticked off satisfy the basic standards for having the economic standards for a sale under market value. Okay, so that's where I say that is mythical. Okay, so but in terms of a cost benefit, I can play devil's advocate. And
Sir, I'm sorry. I know that Representative Fink does have a follow-up question, as does Representative Wozniak. I just wonder if you could wrap up your current statement so we can get to the next question.
So I think that what supporters, if you if they can't say it's wealth maximization, which is not, they would say, a lot of heirs property lacks clear title. And if we just order it sold and one person buys it, all of a sudden the property has clear title. And that has certain benefits. Of course, it's not the members of the family that owned it for a long time. It's oftentimes a real estate speculator who's now getting the property well below its market value.
Thank you, Representative Fink. Your follow-up?
I'll be very quick. And I appreciate that answer, that everything you said about the fair market value and for sale value, that does make sense to me. The one area where I see maybe a potential downside here, I have seen one of these instances where I think the example uses like a third cousin somewhere has a small share in a property. In this case, it was like woodland, where there were profits from harvesting the wood and I think some mineral or gas extraction. And it was like a second, third, maybe fourth, generation inheritor of a small portion of the property. And that person decided to sell it to, I don't know if land speculator is the right term for whoever this purchaser was, but some kind of a business interest that wanted it. I mean, for all I know, it was a logging company or somebody who really was going to do it themselves or something. I don't know. But the point is, isn't the potential benefit of making that small interest attractive to a professional buyer of some kind, that once you get to that level of like third and fourth generation inheritors, you've really got a difficult situation. Like you have a serious collective action problem, don't you? And so isn't there an efficiency to be gained? I mean, I understand why on an emotional level or some other kind of, there are other reasons to say that's not very good. But if you're simply looking to like continue the basic policy of alienability of property, once you're at that third or fourth generation, you've got dozens of family members involved. Could this kind of gum up the works and actually like getting some efficiency back into the use of that property?
Yeah, so what I would say is, I often say this, and I know Jane's heard this many times, that there's no greater fan of the UPHPA than me, right? But there's nobody who appreciates it. It's not a silver bullet, probably more than me. So I think the kind of secondary problems you're talking about can be addressed in other ways, right? So if a family has fractional interest and they're generally happy, even though you have these fractional interests, it shouldn't just then be the ticking time bomb that all of a sudden results in their rights being extinguished and they're losing substantial amounts of family generational wealth. So two things about what you said. There is a feature of the UPHPA that does try to promote consolidation. So I mentioned at the beginning that there's this buyout procedure of if there's somebody who seeks the forced sale, those who want to maintain ownership of it can buy out the fractional interest. The secondary buyout enables the co-tenants who appear in the litigation to buy out the fractional interests of the non-appearing co-tenants. And often in these cases, it's the third cousin with a 2% interest that's located halfway around the country that doesn't make an appearance. So it does have this kind of secondary buyout to try to promote consolidation. The second thing I'll say is that the Uniform Law Commission has had a drafting committee that was trying to address some of the issues you talked about in terms of changing some of the default rules of tenancy and common ownership, also to then promote additional ways of consolidating the ownership. So, as I said, it's not, it's specifically designed to address partition abuse. There's a feature of the UPHPA that promotes consolidation, and the Uniform Law Commission is considering an additional act that could also address the issue that you raised.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Before we move on to Mr. Necky and then Jim Spica, we have a question from Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Professor, for your explanations. Regarding a new co-tenant, indivisible share, tenants in common, how would that affect a month-to-month renter, say, in a house, or apartment building, or farmland growing crops? Could they force an eviction?
Yeah, so that's it's kind of going to depend upon what the background landlord-tenant law is going to be, right? So, you have in other situations, and some of the state law is different, that if you have property that's, for example, foreclosed upon, but there is a tenant on the property, do they get to stay or do they have to go? So I think there's the other body of landlord-tenant law would govern, and the UPHPA doesn't make changes to that other state law.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very articulate testimony. We are now going to move on to Mr. Necky.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Chair Breen, Vice Chairs Edwards and Fink, and members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak today in support of House Bill 4924. My name is Jane Sternicki, and I'm Legislative Counsel for the Uniform Law Commission, where I work on enactment of the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, introduced by Representative Dievendorf. I thank Representative Dievendorf and Professor Mitchell for their thorough overviews of the Act, and the committee for your thoughtful questions so far. I will keep my remarks brief accordingly. To provide some additional background, the Uniform Law Commission is a nonprofit organization that was formed in 1892 to draft nonpartisan model legislation in the areas of the law where uniformity is preferred. The Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act was drafted over a period of 2 years by a panel of ULC commissioners and experts and stakeholders from the heirs property community. Since it was finalized in 2010, the UPHPA has been enacted in 23 jurisdictions, including Connecticut, New York, and Washington, D.C., and it has been introduced in Kentucky, Arizona, and New Jersey this current legislative session. As discussed by Representative Dievendorf and Professor Mitchell, heirs property is property that is owned by multiple tenants in common, when at least some of those tenants in common inherited their interest from the property's previous owner. While many heirs property owners are lower income Black Americans, issues with heirs property can affect anyone, from farm owners in rural Michigan to single family homeowners in Detroit. Heirs property owners are vulnerable to outside actions, and they often see their properties sold at auction on the courthouse steps for significantly under market value. The UPHPA ensures that these families are given adequate due process protections and are able to keep their land within the family whenever possible. However, nothing in the UPHPA prevents tenants in common from unanimously agreeing to sell their entire parcel to a willing buyer. House Bill 4924 would significantly protect and benefit heirs property owners throughout the state of Michigan. I thank you for your consideration, and I welcome your questions.
Any questions for Mr. Necky? Nope. Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. We're now going to hear from Mr. Jim Spica.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appear here as a member of Michigan's delegation appointed by the Michigan Legislative Council to the Uniform Law Commission. That is, I am a Uniform Law Commissioner. I'm also the current chairperson of the probate and estate planning section of the Michigan State Bar, and it behooves me to emphasize that that section is not the state bar itself. I speak on behalf of professional association that is a voluntary association that has about 3,500 members who practice in the area of probate and estate law. The council of the section formed a committee to evaluate the uniform law that is the basis of House Bill 4924, and the section has adopted formally a public policy position in support of 4924. There are some things that the section thinks would improve the bill, and I want to mention those very briefly. They are that the long title, which expresses the legislative intent in adopting the legislation as a whole, should say expressly that this is a bill to adopt the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act by amending the Judicature Act. Section 3405 in the bill should refer to commissioners rather than guardians, and guardians ad litem. And the bill should include the Uniform Law Commission's standard provision on the relation to the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act, which preserves the federal legislation's grant of an exemption from preemption for state legislation in areas that might otherwise be foreclosed by the federal act. This is a procedural provision that is being omitted in the bill that is part of the Uniform Act. And Representative Dievendorf has received these suggestions in writing from me on behalf of the probate and estate planning section, and I hope they will be embodied in a substitute bill eventually. Having said that, I just want to make explicit something that is implicit in everything that Representative Dievendorf and Professor Mitchell have said about the bill, but I want to make it explicit that the problem of vulnerability arises here because the land is it for the low and middle income people affected by abusive partition actions. They don't have the wherewithal to go to the auction and be competitive in bidding on the property. The land is the wealth. And the inability to borrow against a small interest in a tenants in common arrangement for property ownership is the fulcrum. It's really the lever that causes the injustice that both Representative Dievendorf and Professor Mitchell have talked about at length today. The auction procedure that is currently the result of a judge deciding not to physically partition land will give a tremendous advantage to a speculator who wants to use the tiny interest she acquired in the property to be able to acquire the whole property at a very low price. She and her agents are familiar with the court system, with the existing law on partition of tenants in common property, and have the tenants over the barrel that Professor Mitchell has described because of this economic fact of the co-tenants' lives, that some of them are using the property, making it productive in many cases, bearing the expenses as a proper subset of the co-tenants by themselves. And all of that's going to be ignored for the sake of the economy of scale of getting a hypothetical value, which is the market value of the property. That's hypothetical, purely. And what's going to happen on the ground is that the people who use the property, make it productive, to whom it means something, are not going to be bidders at the sale. And that is a problem that the Uniform Law Commission has addressed with Professor Mitchell's help in a very measured and effective way. And I hope the committee will endorse this legislation because it is worthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've sent all of your proposed suggestions to the bill sponsor, I believe. You're muted, sir.
I think you need to unmute him from
Yeah,
the.
okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you. I wasn't
Okay.
able to unmute myself.
And our policy advisor has advised me that she has your suggestions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony. Do we have any questions for Mr. Speaker? Okay. Thank you very much. We are going to read in some cards now. Brad Ward from the Michigan Realtors supports the bill, not wishing to speak. DeShandria Bedingfield on behalf of the, and Jim Schaafsma from the Michigan Poverty Law Program supporting the bill, not wishing to speak. And we will be likely taking this up again for a vote in the coming week or next week. Moving on, we have some referrals to make. I will take a motion from Representative Hope to refer House Bill 5271 to the Committee on Criminal Justice. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbet.
Yeah.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas. The motion prevails.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Edwards to refer House Bill 4793 to the Committee on Government Operations. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 4 pass. The bill is re-referred to the Committee on Government Ops.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Hope to refer House Bill 5316 to the Committee on Government Operations. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 4 pass. The motion prevails.
Thank you. I now take a motion from Representative Arbit to refer House Bill 5317 to the Committee on Government Operations. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 1 nay, 3 pass. The motion prevails.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Devendorf to refer House Bill 5318 to the Committee on Government Operations. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, and 4 pass. The motion prevails.
Thank you. I now take a motion from Representative Hoskins to refer House Bill 5319 to the Committee on Government Operations. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 4 pass. The motion prevails.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Cerniglu to refer House Bill 4225 to the Committee on Education. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter. Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel. Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, and 4 pass. The motion prevails.
Thank you. And I'll take a motion from Representative Edwards to excuse any absent members. That motion is now made. Everybody's excused. And seeing no further business before the Committee on Judiciary will stand adjourned. Thank you.